In the last half of the 16th century, the walled cities of northern India, one by one, opened their gates to the invading armies of the Emperor Akbar, the descendant of Tamerlane and the terrible Genghis Khan. The besieged fortress sends its envoys out, while for miles around, the reverberations of the kettle drums proclaim Akbar's victory. For 50 years, the Mughal armies have campaigned in Hindustan, driving the Rajput princes before them and being defeated in turn. The subdued generals hold out their hands in submission, waiting for the emperor to give his orders. Gradually, Akbar united these medieval kingdoms into one country, extending from the Arabian Sea to the Bay of Bengal. His land was many lands, and his subjects were of many different races and religions. After generations of war, the immemorial and tranquil life of the Indian countryside was resumed. Sacred cattle in their necklaces of gilded bells drank undisturbed at the door of Akbar's palace. The peace which he brought to the Rajput people was not based on oppression, but on tolerance and sympathy. The great emperor gathered his Hindu subjects around him and welcomed the most intelligent and vigorous at the Mughal court. Disregarding the Islamic law which forbids the making of images, he put talented Indians to work in the imperial studios, where they learned the Persian technique of miniature painting. Never stepping into the light themselves, they recorded the great events of the Mughal dynasty and its important personalities. No details of the painters' lives have been preserved, and no anecdotes are related about them. They stand in the background, coming forward only to present their albums of miniatures, on which they often collaborated. There were two schools of miniature painting in existence by the 17th century. The Mughal, which is the Mohammedan form of the art, and the Rajput, which is the Hindu form. Both of them tell us a great deal about medieval India. In his Red Palace at Fatehpur Sikri, Akbar carried on the affairs of his empire, ruling less as a military invader than as an Indian prince. Sitting cross-legged under a scarlet canopy of state, he received the diplomatic mission from his neighbor, the Sultan of Turkey. Prostrating himself, the ambassador touches his head to the ground before the emperor. Verses of salutation are declaimed, and the Sultan's gifts are presented, for the great must never be approached empty-handed. As Akbar replies, his words are taken down by a scribe, while an attendant stirs the hot air with a horsehair fan. Perhaps the Sultan's verses were a stately message of congratulation on the birth of Akbar's heir in 1569. As the joyous news spreads through the palace, the royal apartments in the harem fill with people. Princess Mariam Zamani lies in a pavilion and receives her friends, and a nurse lifts the baby up from his cradle for them to see. The child would be called Saeed, in honor of a saint living nearby, who prophesied the emperor's prayers for a son would be fulfilled. Outside the enclosure, the horoscope of the young prince is being cast by a group of astrologers. They promise him a united land and a prosperous people when he comes to manhood. The shadow of God would shade his throne. That night, the women in the harem take part in a fireworks celebration. When Prince Salim ascended the throne, the hard work of building an empire had been done for him by Akbar. He took the name Jahangir and turned to a more leisurely way of life than his father had ever known. Poets and philosophers sat by his side and solemnly called him the adornment of the face of learning and insight. Scholars and bizarrely dressed Englishmen with curious information were called into the royal enclosure. Historians presented him with verse epics about his warlike ancestors, though he was not inclined to duplicate their exploits. Above all, Jahangir was interested in painting. His artists recorded the brilliant daily routine of his reign in all its picturesque and at times barbaric pageantry. We see the emperor at his window of appearance. When he speaks, the nobles lift up their hands and cry, "Wonder, wonder," to the crowd below. Some are there to petition, but many have come to satisfy themselves that the king is in good health and therefore in command. Among the faces, we see one of the Jesuit missionaries who were encouraged to visit and teach at court. Above Jahangir's head, there is even a picture of the Virgin Mary. In the personal atmosphere of the time, everyone was eager for some form of immortality. Jahangir's favorite courtiers were often rewarded by having their picture painted for the royal portrait albums. Sometimes the bejeweled forms of the emperors tell us little about them individually. Shah Jahan sits godlike on the peacock throne, so firmly in control not even the birds could fly without his permission. In this intensely masculine age, the Mughal painter did not concern himself very much with the lives of women. When the artist has given us a glimpse of them through the trellises and shutters of parda, they appear as embodiments of an ideal of romantic grace and beauty. The emperor would often hunt along the banks of the Jamna, followed by a party of nobles and huntsmen, pursuing the game at his leisure, as the chronicles tell us, sometimes in one way and sometimes in another, according to the variety of it. Hiding in the tall grass, a huntsman holds the reins of a tame nilgai, acting as decoy. If the violent activity and worldliness of the Mughal court are the main interests of its art patrons, the Rajput painters lived mentally and bodily in another environment. And if the Mughal painter is intent upon the present moment, the Rajput painter is intent upon the infinities of Indian life and creed. His art is not concerned with the personal, but with the universal, with luminous riverbanks and starlit cities, and solitary temples under a grey sky, where holy men sit waiting, their minds empty, their souls lost in the peace of total understanding, their bodies left to the care of others. Perhaps it is in the ascetic that the religion and philosophy of India find their ultimate expression. Some are Hindu and some are Muslim. Some pass their lives in silent contemplation, and some are teachers. The simple people of both faiths among whom they lived regarded them as saints and showed their veneration by providing them with their few bodily needs. The enlightenment of the ascetic comes gradually, through yoga, with its stages of patient study and self-discipline. Seated before his teacher, the novice puts upon himself the yoke of abstinence. If his mind is dead to the touch of the external, his soul will be free to seek enlightenment and salvation, and all the sins of the soul's past incarnations will be atoned for in one life. The wind turned the ship from its course upon the waters. The wandering winds of the senses cast man's mind adrift and turn his better judgment from its course. When a man can still the senses, he is illumined. The exaltation of the ascetic, lost in his trance of passive emptiness, is matched by the ecstasy of lovers, lost in their trance of self-absorption. The Rajput painters express themselves in line. It is the music of drawing which absorbs them, and a woman's loveliness in all her moods is their true subject. The sorrow of parting and the rapture of greeting are twin themes of which the Rajput nobility never tire. The presence of one's beloved is contrasted with the emptiness of his absence. Waiting on her rooftop for the return of her lover, a lady draws his picture to evoke his presence and speed him home again. She goes out and wanders among the hills, and the deer come to console her. She hopes to see her beloved upon the road. When she meets him, she will cease her music, and the night will draw around them with solitude and shadow and the sound of closing doors. But these graceful figures, moving and gesturing against the rich background of Indian life, have a meaning beyond a charming depiction of romantic love. For the relationship of lover and beloved is the reflection of all spiritual experience. Self-forgetfulness and self-surrender are essential to such devotion, for the root of all division is pride and self-will, and the drama of spiritual experience is represented by the love of woman for man and man for woman. The participants in this drama are often evolved from the gods and goddesses of the Hindu pantheon. A kneeling woman anointing a young prince with saffron and sandal paste was once Devi, and the prince himself is an incarnation of her consort Shiv. An attendant prepares the sandal paste, whose fragrance Indian poets believed excited passion, along with moonlight, rain, and the buzzing of bees. The Rajput painter more often shows us the unappeased longing of women than the lust of men. A lady restlessly swings in the moments before a storm and feels the fresh wind upon her cheek. Taking no heed of the rain, nor to the locusts screaming amidst the storm, a woman hurries to meet her lover in the forest. Serpents shine in her path and are trampled underfoot. The lightning breaks across the dark clouds in the painter's image of the lovers' union. She hears the wind ruffling the trees and the birds shifting in the night. She thinks it must be he. Her body expands like a flower. Suddenly, her beloved appears, moving slowly towards her through the forest. It was not an ordinary lover she waited for. It was for Lord Krishna, and her passion symbolizes the soul's intense longing for God. For Krishna is the divine bridegroom. The purpose of life was final union with God. The ecstasy of lovers was the only experience in life similar to it. Whether the painter shows us Krishna and Radha, or chooses the story of Shiv and his consort Parvati, human passion is transfigured and is made to express an allegory of divine love. Krishna and Radha typify all lovers. He is love itself. The worship of Krishna was perhaps a protest against asceticism and its denial of life, for here was a personal God who made religion more accessible. The princely cowherd plays his flute and sets the woods astir. All living things rush to adore him. The lotus unfolds in joy, and the forest cranes dance. Though he is God, and the direct incarnation of Vishnu himself, he plays hide and seek with the milkmaids in the forest of Vrindavan, and each of them imagines he follows after her. They cry out when he disappears and begin to search for him everywhere. And we are reminded that they are the troubled souls of men calling for God. They find him by the banks of the Jamna and are struck dumb by his beauty as he dances. In the evening, women bearing jars from the well look for Krishan when he returns from the pasture where he has spent the day tending herd. The tired animals raise a cloud of golden dust as they press towards the village gate. He will lead them to water and food, just as the divinity ministers to the souls of men. The village girls look down, hoping for a glimpse of their lord who has been absent from them all day. The everyday life of the village, the forest and the riverside, served the painter as a setting for sacred legend. His heart was full of the thoughts which he pictured so lovingly. For no spiritual drama in art seems truthful without the radiance of faith.